Sheila, thank you for joining us on the Steadfast podcast. We're so excited to have you with us.
I'm excited to be here. This is going to be fun.
Yeah. Well, before we kind of jump into it, I want to say publicly what I just told you privately, but just as a Christian, as a therapist, I just want to say thank you for putting out such high quality resources for people in this space. I mean, I was thinking about this morning, to me, like, what is sort of the infrastructure and kind of foundation of your books? It's kind of two elements. It's like, it's the research, it's the deep research that you guys do, but also there's a beautiful Jesus lens
Mhm.
that is there as well. I've been sending people your way for years, and I mean, I've got so many reports back of like, my goodness, these books name things that I feel and I know, but I haven't been able to put words to. And so just thank you. Thank you for that.
That's awesome. That's just awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll jump in here. It's nice to see you, Sheila. I was introduced to your book in grad school a few years ago. We were in our sex class, which I like to call it. And it brings up a whole bunch of stuff when you're in a room full of it was really like 20, 25 women in the grad program. So a lot of different experiences with just sexuality in general. So your book was introduced to me. I read it and it was just life changing. I love the science. I love the stats. And it was just that next level of unpacking. So, yeah, like Jessie said, I love your resources. They definitely make their way into the counseling room. Many clients have been it's just part of the getting their voice back, their autonomy, their freedom, just understanding who they are. So thank you. It's really nice to see you.
Yeah, well, I'm just so thrilled that like a counseling grad program is using Great Sex Rescue. That's so good to hear.
Yeah, I think like in this space of like Christian and counseling, when we have psychology and Christianity kind of coming together, we're trying to find like who's doing the research, who's putting the work in, and so you guys have done it. So let's jump in today. So how many things do you have for us? We're gonna throw some things in the shredder today, right? Like some messages that need to go in the shredder that we've gotten
Absolutely.
from Christian culture. So how many do you have, Sheila? What are we going to jump off with?
Well, gosh, I mean, we could do like up to 10, but I have 4 big ones. So we'll see.
Okay.
We'll see
Okay.
how far we get.
All right.
Well, one of the big things we did when we were researching Great Sex Rescue is we surveyed 20,000 women. And then we asked them about their marriages, about their sex lives, and then we gave them a whole bunch of different ideas, some of which we thought were positive, some of which we thought were negative, but we just wanted to see, if you believe this, how does it affect your marriage and sex life? And one of the worst ones that we measured that was absolute garbage is the idea that a wife is obligated to give her husband sex when he wants it. So, 41% of women said that they were taught that, and they went into marriage believing it. And it had devastating effects. It lowers orgasm rates, it lowers libido, it lowers marital satisfaction. But the most interesting one, I thought, is it is one of the biggest drivers of the reason that evangelical women suffer from sexual pain disorders at about 2.5 times the rate of the general population. So, we're looking at rates of 23%
Yeah.
of primary sexual pain, which is huge.
Wow.
7% to the point that penetration's impossible. And when you link it back, it's largely this message.
And it's interesting. I was actually just listening to your podcast. So we're recording this on September 11th, and you guys had one that dropped this morning
Yeah,
that I listened to on my walk. But one thing your daughter Rebecca said, which I thought was really interesting on this topic, was that we have one message that we give the Christian population before marriage, which is like, this idea of sex as a way to connect is artificial and kind of surface level, right? That's not really deep connection. But then what we tell married women right after you get married is if you want to have a deeper emotional connection with your husband, the way that you get there is you've got to give him sex whenever he wants. And so speak a little bit too, could you guys talk about this in She Deserves Better, which is one of my favorite books, but this kind of message of, and the way that we teach sex, which I'm also going to drop in the show notes, your curriculum on kind of how to work with your kids through these conversations. We've done this with our 14-year-old, 12-year-old, and 10-year-old here, and 2 girls and 1 boy. It's great. But some of this messaging that we give about sex growing up, also your all's research has shown lends itself and kind of leans in this direction of causing some of these issues later on.
Well, absolutely. Because when we tell kids, if you have sex, you're going to feel connected, even though you're not really connected. And so, you got to not have sex because it's false intimacy, right? And then as soon as you do get married, you tell everyone, well, you can't expect him to feel close to you without giving him sex. It's like, well, which is it? Which is
Right.
it?
Right.
And what we've really not done is teach what is healthy intimacy. What does healthy intimacy look like? Because instead, we've taught boys especially that they don't have feelings or emotions except for anger. You're allowed to have anger, but that's about it.
Yep.
You're allowed to be angry or happy, and that's it. And so when they feel something, when they want to feel intimate, they don't know what to do because they can't be vulnerable. Because how can you be being vulnerable means I need to understand what I'm feeling, and then I need to open that up to someone else and share it. But if I can't even name what I'm feeling, how can I be vulnerable? So I have absolutely no way to connect. But sex gives me this quick dopamine hit. Right. And so we have taken boys, especially, we have failed to emotionally disciple them. And then they get married and we tell them, well, at least you'll feel connected if you have sex. And meanwhile, that's not real connection. And so women are just going through the motions, giving these men sex who aren't opening up to them. And then the women end up feeling used. And it's just, it's a big fat mess. Like, we need to do better than this.
Yes, we do.
And the other end of that is the perimenopause aspect of this, when if that has been your experience of obligation sex, and then you get into this period of time where your body is hijacked, but then there's actual changes that happen where there's actual maybe pain where, and then you can't, or if you do, it's just so painful, like how that just, creates even this bigger mess of now what?
Oh yeah, so many women give up on sex in perimenopause, menopause. They're like, no, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I've been forcing myself to do this for decades and I'm done. Like, I've had it. And, I find that really tragic because it doesn't need to be that way. And largely the church has created that because of our harmful teachings. And that's what I really want people to understand, is that so many of these problems that we have, we would not have had if we hadn't have had that teaching. And that we found that especially in our survey for our book, She Deserves Better, is that when girls internalize these toxic messages as teenagers around sex, around their body, around their purpose, etc., their marriages end up worse than if they had never gone to church at all.
Gosh, Sheila.
So like, church on the whole tends to be beneficial. It really does. This is a very nuanced topic. Like, it's hard to tease all this stuff out. So we've tried to tease it out as well as we can. So church on the whole tends to be a positive thing. You're in community, you've got people who care about you. That's all a positive thing. Having faith is a positive thing. But when we combine it with all these toxic things, all the benefits disappear.
Right.
And that's so tragic. And like I said, this isn't of Jesus, so it never needed to be this way. And yet we have done this to people.
Right. Right. I think about so many people I talk to who kind of start realizing this type of thing. And then they become able to kind of to name these things and see these patterns of, oh my gosh, like that, I felt triggered here, but I pushed this down and I've ignored kind of this internal thing within myself for all these years. Like, when they start to sort of through trauma healing and all of that, like, kind of become aware of all of this stuff. I feel like one thing that starts to happen is, like, they start to realize, like, oh my gosh, Jesus really did come to set the captives free. Oh my gosh, like, he really does, like, see me and know me and care, but we have all of these, like, layers of things that we've kind of propped up that cause a lot of harm. And not just for women, but for men. Like you said earlier, like, it's not some neglectful thing that we've done with boys. We actually teach boys that you're supposed to be this, and this, which sets them up completely for failure.
Most dangerous ones, I think, is that we teach that men are visual in a way that girls will never understand, and God created men to lust, right? Yes. And Every Man's Battle actually says that when it comes to sexual sin, we got there naturally simply by being male. In the follow-up book, Every Heart Restored, the authors say that men just don't have that Christian view of sex. They say that God created men to lust and to consume women. And so, the way that you fight against that is you transfer all of that onto your wife. So instead of lusting after every other woman, you just lust after one for your entire life. And that is what God desires. And so if you're a man, think about it. You're growing up in this culture where you feel like God is angry at you every time you notice boobs, right? Because that means that you have somehow sinned and you're disgusting. And you start watching porn. You feel this endless shame cycle. The only way out of the shame cycle is to watch more porn because it makes you forget the shame. And so this is just a hot mess. But then you think, when I get married, it will all go away because then my wife can be my sexual outlet, my lawful sexual outlet, as Doug Wilson says and as Every Man's Battle says. And it doesn't work because porn and sex are not substitutes for one another. They're polar opposites, right? Porn says, I want to use you, and sex says, I want to know you. And when he approaches intercourse and sex with his wife from a using perspective, sex is still going to make you feel empty. And it doesn't do anything for you.
Yeah.
But this whole time you feel like if I use my wife's body, then I won't lust after other women. And so using her, even if she doesn't want to, is holier than lusting after other women because God gave me her body to use and consume so that I don't sin. So like having intercourse with a woman who doesn't want it and pressuring her and guilting her is seen as actually a holy act because I am doing what God made for me. And it's so terribly messed up.
It is. And I just think about too, like when we think about the obligation sex message, like we immediately, at least in my mind, maybe first go to like how harmful it is for the woman, right? But think about like how harmful that is for the man too. Over time of just kind of this, it almost seems to me like this picture of just like a bucket with like a bottom, no bottom. So this like intimacy bucket is never really going to be full or true or real. It's like it's just falling through the bottom like every time. And nothing can really be built on either side that's true and right and what marriage is supposed to be doing,
Yeah, we've muddied the waters of good news, of the good news. Like you have to go through so much mud to even find where's the good news in this? Like where's the truth? Like this isn't God. Like this can't be God. God couldn't have designed this covenant to be where one person is being dominated and used. That's like anti good news, So
Yeah, and I think what I find so sad is I've talked to so many women, when you go around and you really go down deep, the feeling that a lot of women have is that God was my pimp.
Oh, gosh.
Because here I am, I don't want to have sex. I feel used. My husband's watching porn. He's objectifying me. But God wants me to let him use my body. And God's upset at me if I say no or draw boundaries. And so it feels like God is sexually trafficking you to your husband. And I think the knowledge that that was never God's will can be so healing for women.
Yeah.
That feeling of pressure, that feeling of God being angry at me, that was never God. That is what our evangelical teachers have said over and over again as they have dismissed women's real needs. I mean, one of the most blatant, as we were doing our research for the Great Sex Rescue. So I had the privilege, there were three of us who wrote the book. Joanna Sawatsky is our statistician. Rebecca Lindenbach, my daughter, is our survey designer, and she co-authored the book as well. All the funny lines are hers. And then I was the one who had to read all of the bestsellers. And as I'm reading these evangelical bestsellers over and over again, there's a theme, which is in that postpartum period, after you've had a baby, the main thing that you need to worry about is making sure that your husband doesn't feel jealous of the baby and making sure that he doesn't feel left out. And so keep giving him sexual favors.
Wow.
And it's like you've just pushed a baby out of you. You've got a gaping wound, often stitches. You can't walk. You're leaking milk everywhere. You're not sleeping. And your main concern needs to be to make sure that he gets the same frequency of sexual release that he did before you were pregnant. That's what intended for pleasure said. But, I've heard from women who had like a baby. I had one woman, she had a baby that was immediately taken into the NICU because it was a difficult delivery. She hadn't seen her baby yet. She went to shower and her husband got in the shower and wanted a hand job, And this was normal. And their marriage has been turned around after reading our books. They had like 12 kids or something. And their marriage was turned around and he was just devastated. But he felt like that was supposed to be his way of dealing with stress. So whenever he felt stress, he would go to his wife for this.
Because that's the
And it just
message that he's got.
Yeah. And that's what our books teach. Like, this
Yeah.
is what our best-selling books teach.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, just such a picture of like, there are wolves in sheep's clothing that like have put all of these messages into the system. I mean, this system is set up to have like a hierarchy to it, you know? And if we've got this system set up, then we are going to have people who abuse this system. And it's really sad.
And
It's
that's
very
one of the
sad.
other garbage messages. I mean, we've talked about a bunch of the garbage messages already, like obligation sex, all men struggle with lust, et cetera, et cetera. But another big one is that marriage is supposed to be a hierarchy.
Yeah.
This is one of the fundamental teachings in evangelical churches, right? That when it comes to decision making, if there's a disagreement, he has to make the final decision because he's in authority over her, he's her head, and this is the way, this is what God requires of him. And we actually measured this in several of our surveys, most recently for our book, The Marriage You Want. And that was really fun because this is our first survey where we did matched pairs. So we surveyed both people in the couple and we were able to see, when he says this, what happens to her? Or when she says this, what happens to him? So really, really cool. It was fun. And Joanna, our stats nerd, just went crazy with that one. But, we looked at what happens when he makes the final decision. And we looked at what happens even if they just believe he's supposed to make the final decision. And you see divorce rates skyrocketing. And we're not the only ones who found that. John Gottman, who's the world's premier marriage researcher, also found that divorce rates really increase when men make the final decision in marriage. And we just see everything getting worse. Women are in far more chronic pain when they each believe that he should make the final decision. And there's so many more markers for emotional immaturity in that marriage. So there's a lot more emotional dysregulation. There's a lot more passive aggressive behavior. There's a lot more angry outbursts. And I find this one so interesting because as I've talked to people over the years about this idea that a husband should make the final decision, they say, but if you don't have a tiebreaker, then what are you going to do when you disagree? And they think that's a mic drop moment. And I'm like, we've been married 34 years. We've never needed a tiebreaker. 78.9% of couples function without a tiebreaker. Like if you can't picture a marriage without a tiebreaker, you're telling on yourself. Like that says a lot about you because that's not normal. Yeah. And I think one of the guiding principles that we use, because we've done these huge studies, is Jesus in Matthew 7, is talking to his disciples about false teachers and when people are saying things that aren't true. And then he says in the middle of that conversation that we need to judge by the fruit. So when you're trying to figure out, when you have people who are teaching two different things and you're trying to figure out which one is right, you judge by the fruit because a bad tree can't bear good fruit and a good tree can't bear bad fruit. And that's what we're trying to do is we've measured the fruit of these teachings. We've looked at marital satisfaction, at health outcomes, at sexual satisfaction. And over again, what you see is that the fruit of putting a man in authority over a woman, the fruit of seeing sex as something which is primarily for men, the fruit of describing sex as a male entitlement and a female obligation, the fruit of all of that is rotten. And if that were of Jesus, we'd see good fruit, but we don't. The good news is that most Christians, even though they say they believe this stuff, they don't practice it. Right. And that's why Christians tend to have good marriages when you look at big studies, is because they may say they believe this stuff, but it doesn't actually impact their relationship. But when you do practice it, really, really terrible things happen. So if a doctrine only works if you don't practice it, that doctrine's probably a bad one.
Right. Exactly.
In that verse, I should have looked at the reference. I think it's Leviticus or it's in Numbers. But when God, tells the Israelites, like, don't fear false prophets. He said, because if what they say doesn't come true, that's how you'll know. But you don't need to fear them because it's going to be true or it's not. So when you're talking about like these doctrines, these teachings, if they're resulting in things that aren't true or harmful, then we have to go back to that teaching and say something's wrong here. And we can say, I don't have to follow this. Like, I don't, this might not be really what God's saying. This might not be God's heart. If it's leading to something that's the opposite.
Yeah. I mean, it's this idea of bringing things into the light. I I think about a lot how I just feel like we're in like a new reformation with the church. I mean, you think about the first one, there was so much that was being twisted with scripture. And then when people had an opportunity to read God's word for themselves, the freedom came, right? And so now we're in a place where, because of this medium we have right now, like we have so much opportunity to hear so many different voices from the church and for so many things to come to light. I mean, we have now this push for like, let's, like in the religion business, documentary that just came out, like, let's talk about what's going on with the financials, the work that you guys
Mhm.
have done, Sheila, with marriages. Like, you've surveyed all of these people, you have the data, you are bringing things to light. So we have like all of these different, I'm thinking about Beth Allison Barr and the work that she's done with different translations of scripture, and how there are just
Mhm.
things I think now in these recent years that are coming to light, that some of this false stuff is going to fall away as things are just being brought into the light, and there's some
Mhm.
accountability and there's some fruit inspection, like you're saying. And so I'm super pumped up and fired up for this season that we're in and for our kids and what the Lord is going to do like in the generations to come in this area.
A lot of hope too for the next generation. I think that what is going to happen over the next little while is that women are going to find our voices because and this is my story, I sat for 20, gosh, how long? Probably 25 years under the leadership of churches that were very anti-woman because I felt like I didn't have a choice, right? If you wanted to hear about Jesus, that's kind of the price you pay is you have to
Yep.
sit in a church that doesn't respect women. And you're willing to give that up because you love Jesus. And then there comes a point where you're like, no, I can't do it anymore. And I think more and more women are saying that. I'm Canadian, and one of, I think, people's favorite Canadian authors is Lucy Maud Montgomery, of course, who wrote Anne of Green Gables, right? Like everyone loves Anne of Green Gables. We all love Anne. But she wrote a short story, I believe in 1902, called The Strike at Putney, which is wonderful. So everyone, you just need to hit pause for a sec and go Google The Strike at Putney. You can read the whole thing. It's easy to find, and it's just short. But she wrote it about this church where the women's auxiliary invited a female missionary to come and address them. And the pastor was going to be away that day. And so they invited a whole bunch of other churches to come too. And she would just address from the pulpit because the church hall wasn't large enough. And the men got so upset because a woman couldn't speak from the pulpit. And so the church ladies were all like, well, if women can't speak from the pulpit, then goodness, we really aren't good enough to put flowers or dust or teach Sunday school or do the fundraisers. And they all just went on strike. And within a few weeks, the men were begging them to come back and totally gave in. And I just thought, like, that was written 120 years ago.
Mm.
120 years ago, we're still having the same
We're still in the
conversations.
same. Yep.
Yeah, but I wonder, maybe women have had it now.
Yeah.
And we're like, no, you can't steal my Jesus from me, because that is what they're doing. When they tell women that you can't go to Jesus yourself, your husband is your mediator. When they tell women that, you need to give up your body to be used and Jesus doesn't care about that, they're stealing your sense of comfort, your only source of comfort in these abusive situations. They're stealing him from you. And I just wonder when women are going to say no,
Right.
that we have a choice. And there are healthy churches out there. There are healthy communities. They just may not look the same as some of the mega churches a lot of us have been going to.
There's a group of people who are carrying the burden of these teachings, but their husbands have no idea. And so sometimes, and the men are like, you're taught what? And they're like, I don't want that for you. But it kind of brings this thing of like, what are men being taught? What are, a lot of guys are like, I don't want you to feel that way. Some of that purity culture teaching. But there's a lot of guys that are like, I don't want you to feel that way. And I don't want to be a hierarchy with you. And they have even no idea their wives are holding that
Mm.
inside, because sometimes we think, well, they must have gotten the same teachings we did. They must know that I'm taught I can't wear a short skirt. I can't wear a two-piece at the beach, or, every man at the beach is going to be, in
It's my
danger.
job to
It's
protect
my job.
everybody's eyes around me.
Everyone's right. And it's just another group here of like but the women, that's not always enough for them to release what they've been holding, because it is so ingrained. I mean, it just goes deeper and deeper, and they have a hard time even accepting that from their husbands because they're like, I don't even know what to do with that.
Yeah, we found a lot of evidence of that, especially in our focus groups, where it was not the men who were giving their wives these messages. Now, there are some marriages where it definitely is the men as well, and those marriages tend to get quite abusive with a lot of coercion, et cetera, et cetera. But then there's the marriages where the women had internalized the stuff. Because remember that when it comes to Christian marriage books, probably 80% of them are read by women. Like 80% of the readers are female, right? Men don't go around reading marriage books, but women will read Power of a Praying Wife and Sacred Marriage and Love and Respect and For Women Only. Like we'll read these books in the millions, and the Christian marriage industry is $1 million business. Like, over the last 10 years, we're talking like 40 or $50 million. Like this is a lot of books, right? And so women have read all of these things. Women have internalized these things. Women want to serve Jesus, and they've been taught this is how you serve Jesus. And men, they've just mostly been going to men's breakfasts where they don't talk about any of this stuff. Maybe they talk about, hey, you got to be faithful to your wife and you got to show up and take initiative, but that's about it. And so they have no idea. And we talked to a lot of women who, when they finally, like, I remember Kay's story. Kay's story was so great. So she had a really good sex life with her husband. She had been orgasmic. She wanted sex. She enjoyed sex. But after each child, she got postpartum depression, and it got harder and harder to get out of it. And after her third child, she was really struggling. But she kept initiating sex every 72 hours because she felt like that's what she was supposed to do. Multiple books talk about the 72-hour rule and how he can't go without sex for more than 72 hours. So she would initiate sex, but she wasn't orgasming anymore. She wasn't enjoying it. And then finally one day she just said, I can't handle this anymore. And he's like, what's going on? And she explained, and he's like, oh my gosh, I never want you to do anything you don't want to do. Like never, ever, ever. If we are in the middle of something and you're like, I don't want to do this, I want you to tell me, and we will just stop and just go to sleep. And over the next few months, he really proved that to her. And so there were several times where she was like, yeah, I thought this was going to work for me tonight, but it's just not. And he just stopped. She realized that it was her choice, and she began to get orgasmic again, and her sex drive came back, and they settled into a new routine of sex about every 72 hours. But this time it's because she wants it, because he proved to her that she wasn't obligated. This was an experience that they were sharing together. And that made all the difference when she knew that she could trust him.
What a beautiful picture. I mean, I think that's kind of what I was getting at before with like that image of the bucket. But like, think about their like marriage after that true moment of intimacy where like she was vulnerable with him and shared something, and he met her there. Like she reached for him and he was like, oh my gosh, like I had no idea you were feeling this way. I don't want you to feel this way. Like we're in this together. Like that's the full bucket, right? And so like they were able to get to that place of true intimacy when things come to light, and there was that meeting. Thank you for sharing that. It's beautiful.
Okay, so what are the two biggest problems in marriage that we hear about all the time? The two things that hurt marriage the most when you have conflict over them?
Gosh, you're gonna put two therapists right on the spot.
I'm not saying what are the actual ones. I'm just saying like what are the ones that people always say are like the two biggest issues. Yeah, I hear like sex and money, right? If you
Okay, yes.
Communication around sex and money. So we actually measured it. So we measured marital satisfaction on a scale of 1 to 100, and most people fall within 60 to 90. It's not like there's a lot of people sitting at 20, right? And so there's not a lot of fluctuation. So small changes are actually quite important. So when you have money problems, it decreases marital satisfaction by about 5 points. So that's significant. When you go from having sex once a week or several times a week to less than once a month, you decrease marital satisfaction by about 10 points. Okay, so again, really significant. But when you go from doing 50% of the housework to doing 90% of the housework, you decrease marital satisfaction by 30 points. And so sex and money are not the biggest problems in marriage. Housework and mental load are. And a lot of women are just really tired. And one of the biggest libido killers is mental load and just carrying everything for the family. And we measured this in the Marriage You Want. That was one of our specific research questions was, how much does mental load impact marriage? And we looked at it in all kinds of different ways. But even something like we asked people, who takes care of your mom? Like if there's a Mother's Day card, if there's a birthday card, who takes care of it? And in about 50% of marriages, they each take care of their own mom. And in the other 50%, she takes care of both. There's hardly anywhere he takes care of both. And you see this with multiple things, with medical and dental appointments. Either they make their own or she makes them for both of them. And over again, when she does stuff for both of them, when she's carrying all of the mental load, we see we just see huge results in marital satisfaction. And it just goes way down. And that is something that the church just doesn't address, because the church is constantly saying that women's role is in the home. And this
Right.
applies even, by the way, for stay-at-home moms. Even if you are a stay-at-home mom, it doesn't matter. If you are carrying all of the mental load, it is too much.
Right.
It's that lack of partnering, of feeling like you have a partner in those responsibilities. And you know, in your book, when you talk about the 3 tiers, right? Sometimes I think, maybe I'm wrong, but women, or if they're the primary ones at home, feel like they're in tier 1 all the time.
Yes.
And then, but what if the other partner's in tier 2? Not realizing we need to both be on tier 1 together to feel like we're both responsible for the daily things in the home.
I think we've, like, in the church, really gendered these types of things. You know, I mean, there's a lot of this, like, caricature of, like, a woman and a man and all these different categories. But, you know, one of the things that I think about with a healthy marriage is operating in your gifting, you know, and what fires you up. I feel like when we're talking about, like, a healthy marriage or a healthy friendship or whatever, like, we're operating in these areas that, like, I feel like I have some expertise and agency over. And also, I'll throw this out there. This was a Brene Brown teaching she did. It was like a TED Talk or something on, like, on men and women or something like that. I'll link it. But one of the things that I've heard her talk about is she and her husband will give, like, a percentage on, like, she'll come through the door and she'll be like, listen, I'm at, like, a 20, you know, right now. And he'll be like, okay, I've got like 60. Let's put that together and see if we can figure out how to get this second part of the day done, you know? But that kind of partnering, I think, is maybe what we're missing in some of the ways that we caricature men and women's roles in the church.
Yeah, because we say that, you know, it's women's job, that women are primarily called to the home and to look after the kids. Several of our books, like His Needs, Her Needs, or Jimmy Evans' Marriage on the Rock, they literally say that God gave men a need for domestic support. So God gave men a need to not do housework and to have their wives do all the housework. And we've said this, and then we turn around and we also say, but women, make sure that you're not spending so much time with your kids that you ignore your husband. Remember that your marriage has to come first. So it's like, no matter what she does, she's wrong. And we don't simultaneously say to husbands, hey, you need to be an involved partner. But it is partnership. That's exactly right. It's partnership that results in great marriages. It's feeling like you have someone you can rely on, someone who's putting in effort too. Someone who is taking initiative and noticing what needs to be done. Like,
Right.
we have a whole chapter in The Marriage You Want on the importance of taking initiative. And this is kind of interesting because when you ask Christian women, do you want him to be your spiritual leader? Overwhelmingly, women say yes, right? But when you say, what does it look like to be a spiritual leader? They're describing things that they already do. Right? It looks like getting the kids ready for church on Sunday. It looks like noticing when Billy and Bobby are fighting with each other and trying to figure out what the root issue is and resolving it. You know, it looks like noticing when, you know, my daughter is sad because she's been being bullied at school and getting involved and talking to the teacher and helping my daughter get into a good friend group. Like, it's just noticing and taking initiative. And these are all things that women are already doing, but we don't have a word for it when women do it.
Right.
But when men do it, we call it spiritual leadership. And it's like, we're not looking for a guy to be our authority. We're just looking for a guy to take initiative, to notice what needs to be done and to notice what's important and then jump in with us.
So glad you said that, Sheila, because I mean, this has been coming up a lot. Well, part of how I work as a therapist is I'll say, what does that mean? What does it mean for you to lead your wife spiritually? And sometimes I get a blank stare because it's like, what do you mean? What does it mean? It just means I do this first. And when we get into it, it's like, no, reading your Bible first doesn't make you a spiritual leader. You know, that does that, you know, driving to church, that doesn't make you a spiritual leader. Like, what does this really mean? And it's really hard. I mean, I don't know the answer to that, which is why I think we need to ask the question, because it's this phrase that's used, but none of us know what it means. And it means it means so many things to so many different people. And then there's like anxiety because I'm not doing this right. But we don't even know what we're talking about because we haven't been able to name it. And when we really get down to it, I think it ends up being more of that partnership because we say, well, what did Jesus do? How did Jesus lead us? Well, he talked, right? He talked, he explained, he met people, like he met them where they're at, right? And then people followed. They didn't follow because Jesus says, he was showing them like how to read a scroll, per se. And then they followed him. They were following him for his more than just what he was doing. It's like who he was.
Think about how often Jesus noticed people, right? Like he notices Zacchaeus in the tree and he calls him out. He notices the woman who touched him, who was bleeding. He talks about how, was it Nathaniel that he noticed sitting under the tree when he called him? Like he notices things and then he gets those people involved. And I think that is what head means. Like if you look at the Greek for head, it really is more about that initiative than it is. It's not authority. There is no connotation of authority in the Greek word for head. It really is more initiative. And so what men are being called to especially is just to take that initiative, to notice what's going on in my family, to be emotionally involved, just like Jesus was. And that's what actually works to give you the marriage that you want.
Anything else that you feel like we haven't said that we need to say?
I think one of the big reasons that things got so bad in the evangelical church is that we listened to the wrong people and we elevated the wrong voices. When you look at who wrote our best-selling sex and marriage books, virtually nobody is qualified. You don't see people who are counselors. You don't see people who are psychologists. I looked at we analyzed 13 of the best-selling sex and marriage books. Of those 13 books, there were only 11 peer-reviewed citations, like citations to actual peer-reviewed journals. I don't mean 11 per book. I mean 11 across all 13 books. And the majority of them were to theology journals. So people are saying things with no backing at all. They're making claims with no backing at all. And we let pastors write a lot of our books. Pastors are not trained in healthy marriage dynamics. Pastors aren't trained in trauma. And my prayer going forward is that we stop listening to people who aren't qualified and who don't sound like Jesus. And we start really looking at the data and we look at things through a Jesus lens. Because it's okay to throw out all those old books. You can throw out Power of a Praying Wife. You can throw out Love and Respect. Please don't recycle. Please, please, please do not donate them because then someone else is going to get a hold of it. Like rip off the cover, recycle it, burn it. I don't care. But, we can get rid of these older books that haven't helped us. And we can say we need something new. We need something different. We need healthy because we haven't had that. And when pastors are just preaching the same old messages, then it's okay to stand up and say, no, you don't get to do that anymore because we're not gonna stand for it. And we do have the power. That's the thing. We're the ones who buy the books, we women. We're the ones who bring people to church. If we start speaking up and we say, no, we're not gonna stand for this anymore, then I think we can really make a lot of change. And I hope that we see that start to happen.
What would be some like moving forward steps for someone who's kind of they've internalized these messages and they're seeing what's going on, it's not good. How moving forward for them, like ways to set a boundary or ways to support them and
well, first of all, read Great Sex Rescue. If you haven't yet, She Deserves Better looks at the messages we got as teens. The Marriage You Want looks at the messages that we've had about marriage. Read some books that show you what healthy looks like. And then one of the really, really, really pieces of good news that we have from all of our research, and I think this is good news, is that you don't always have to make huge changes to see results. Like sometimes if you just change going a little bit more in a certain direction, you're going to see that things will start to snowball. Because sometimes I think we feel like we have to change absolutely everything in our lives. But no, you can say, you know what, this is an area I'm going to address. I'm going to start speaking up. I'm not going to do all the housework anymore. I'm going to make my kids do more. I'm going to say no to my husband. I'm going to stop doing everyone's laundry, whatever it might be. Or maybe it's sex and you're like, I'm not going to initiate when I don't want to. And I'm going to take some of that back or whatever it is. But remember that as you do little things, other things also tend to improve. And so we can get overwhelmed with how everything is bad and we've done everything wrong. But choose the thing that you think most matters to you, where you can see a clear boundary that you can set, where you have some support, and walk forward in that. And then you'll find that often the other things tend to also get better and you have more strength in other areas too.
Sheila, I think you're awesome. And
Thank you.
I'm very thankful for you and for the work you're doing. I mean, I just have thought a few times, like, it can't be easy. Like, I feel like you guys have probably got to feel like you're rolling a boulder up a mountain, like, all the time. But thank you for continuing on with it, because I know personally that it has benefited me, and I know that it's benefited my clients, and I believe it's benefiting the church with a capital C. And so thank you.
Thank you for that.